Good morning and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. We are here for an allowable ex parte communication briefing filed by SERC Reliability Corporation. First, I would note for the record that all commissioners are present here in the hearing room. Ms. Westerhill, if you would please go over the ground rules and procedures for this presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today is Tuesday, January 29th, 2025. We are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for an allowable ex parte briefing from the SERC Reliability Corporation and non-docket 2024-55-E. The subject matter to be discussed at this briefing today is SERC 101, ERO Enterprise, Transmission Planning, Load Growth, and Changing Resource Mix. This is the same subject matter to be discussed as was noticed on December 5th, 2024 for this briefing. As the chairman mentioned, this is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 subsection C. The requirements of this statute are in part that the allowable ex parte be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. I therefore ask that the presenters, commissioners, and staff all please refrain from discussing any matters not related to this specific topic. Secondly, the statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to any ultimate or issue that which is either or is likely to come before the commission. Third, I would ask that the presenters, commissioners, and staff refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or documents of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion in the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, who is Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. Fourth, if anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope of this noticed subject matter or topic, or if anyone does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection must be made. This means that you must make your objection at the time of the misconduct or if an overstep happens. You cannot wait until after the fact to object. And finally, everyone in attendance today in person must register in or sign in. Everyone in the hearing room must also read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door whenever you came in today. It is required by law for each attendee in person to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260 subsection C have been complied with at this presentation. It is also, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners and everyone present, that the Office of Regulatory Staff representative is here today as the neutral with regard to this presentation. Mr. Chairman, the request and notice for this allowable ex parte communication and briefing are in order.
Thank you very much. Would the parties at this point please introduce themselves, beginning with SERC?
Dave Krieger with SERC Reliability Corporation.
And Rhiannon Gomez with SERC Reliability Corporation.
Thank you very much and welcome. And for ORS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and Commissioners. Chad Torrey on behalf of ORS, and I am here today as the designee of the Executive Director pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-3-260C6A.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. You may proceed.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rhiannon Gomez again, and I'm an Associate Legal Counsel with SERC Reliability Corporation. And I'd like to introduce once more Dave Krieger. He is our Senior Project Manager of the Operating Committee, and he's been in the electric power industry since 2004. In the last 7 years, he's been with SERC Reliability Corporation. He is a great asset to our team. He's responsible for operating in standards programs with oversight of information sharing and production of guidelines and best practices related to the electric grid. And moving towards the PowerPoint. So today we'll be sharing with you key insights on the reliability of the bulk power system, regarding first an introductory to the Electric Reliability Organization, otherwise known as the ERO enterprise, and where exactly SERC fits into that. So a brief overview of those things. And then we'll move, Dave will move into, Mr. Krieger will move into these SERC's regional risks with including load growth, extreme weather, and integrated variable resources, otherwise known as IVRs. All right, so moving into the Electric Reliability Organization. So I'd like to actually begin with a little background information. Back in 2003, there was something called the Northeast Blackout, and it left over 50 million people without power, and it was known as the worst blackout in history thus far. So in 2005, Congress responded by giving the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, otherwise known as FERC, the authority to certify an electric reliability organization. Because up until that point, it was more just standards and guidelines as opposed to anything that had to be enforced on the electric industry. So at that point, they wanted to make things mandatory so that the electric companies had to either abide by it or be sanctioned. So that was actually the first time that happened. And with that, the ERO, the Electric Reliability Organization, was created, and FERC certified the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, otherwise known as NERC, to oversee it and to create the authority and the standards. So what NERC did was create, because the North American region is quite large, created 6 regions, and SERC is one of those regions, which is where South Carolina falls into. You are in the SERC's footprint. We have about 16 states. And moving to SERC, which is us. So again, we are one of the 6 regions, and we are tasked with, among other things, monitoring compliance with and enforcing mandatory reliability standards, performing outreach, training, and education for the utility companies, reliability assessment and performance analysis through studies and assessments, and situation awareness and event analysis, which would be for events that would impact the grid, such as extreme weather and cyber or physical security attacks on the infrastructure. And SERC is actually one of the largest of the NERC regional entities. So as you can see on the PowerPoint, so we have 16 states in our footprint. Only one other region has that many states. But we have 97 million estimated population, 300 registered entities, the 118,000 miles of bulk electric system transmission, and 3,400 generating units, the 261 gigawatts forecasted load. We have one of the highest loads, which the transmission, from a transmission standpoint, 25% of all NERC bulk electric system transmission lines are in our footprint, as well as 40% of all generation in the Eastern Interconnection. So while there's 6 entities under NERC, we have 25% of the bulk electric system transmission lines. So we are one of the bigger and more robust regions, just by sheer need. And from a load perspective, a load served perspective, almost 1/3 of the load in the U.S. is within our footprint. So it's a very large amount. And so regarding our mission and where we fall in line there, our mission is solely the reliability and security of the bulk power system. That is the reason we were created, just to ensure that reliability and security. And our objective, we are an objective and independent resource, which is, I think, very, very important to emphasize, because we do not own any assets. We don't own any electric any part of the electric grid or anything in the energy market. We are that independent resource. That we are reliable and just given that we do not have any bias one way or the other, our answer or our guidance will always just be whatever is truly in the best interest of the reliability of the electric power grid. Now, we realize that there are other things that states look at, such as cost and environmental aspects. So those aren't two things that we touch on. We just focus on the reliability and security aspect of the bulk power system. And again, just emphasizing that we work with the electric utility industry, we do not work for them. So our funding actually comes from the public.
Ma'am, not to interrupt you, but could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
SERC is under what department or what agency or how?
The Department of Energy.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're under FERC, the Federal Electric Reliability Organization. So they are the federal aspect connection to us to the federal government. But then FERC is a separate corporation, and then we're under NERC, and then we're under NERC.
So each one is fairly independent, but under the same rules?
Yes, so NERC creates the standards and regulations, and FERC approves them. They have oversight, but it is we are separate from the government. NERC is separate, and then so is SERC and all the other 5 regions.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And just to briefly emphasize why we do state outreach, why we're here, right? So states play a huge role in the world of electric reliability. And you have distinct responsibilities and duties to your customers, constituents, and consumers, all within your state, in order to make sure that at the flip of a switch, their lights turn on. So you guys have a very vested interest, in working with you is how we can definitely see to ultimately provide the best and most reliable electric grid to everyone. So that we are working on reaching more people just like you to provide any kind of educational resources we can to you. And with that, I'd like to turn the discussion over to our Senior Project Manager of the Operating Committee, Dave Krieger, who will highlight transmission planning, load growth, and changing resource mix.
Thank you. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to meet with you today. As Rhiannon mentioned, SERC's mission is to ensure the reliability and security of the bulk electric system. We begin our efforts by identifying reliability risks. Each year, SERC identifies and evaluates the risk impacting the electric system. We have a process for stakeholders to submit risks for review, and then the risk review working group evaluates and scores the risks, and the engineering and operating committees review, revise, and approve the risk review's recommendations. Although we only include the top 10 risks in this report, we review additional risks yearly. The 2024 SERC top 10 risks are listed here in the regional risk report. The various SERC committees use the risk report to guide their work plans, ensuring they focus on developing mitigation strategies for the risks identified through the risk review process. As with any year, stakeholders can submit new risks for consideration using the risk review process. Listed are the risks submitted for consideration in 2024. As with all risks in the registry, they will be included in the annual review. Rapid non-traditional load growth was considered a sufficient concern to be included in the SERC Top 10 2024 risks. I'll expand on this in later slides. Extreme weather continues to be a significant risk to the SERC footprint in the U.S. South Carolina is susceptible to the summer heat, cold winters, hurricanes, and other intense storms. SERC and the ERO focus on meeting customer demands during these extreme events. The next few slides summarize some of those major events impacting the SERC footprint in 2024. Burl impacted Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Fortunately, the storm weakened from Category 5 to Category 1 before landfall. These areas experienced impacts from tornadoes that occurred as the system progressed. I don't think we will forget Hurricane Helene's devastating impact on the upstate and western North Carolina. Hurricane Milton occurred in October, impacting the Florida region of the SERC footprint. This slide provides a graphical view of some of the severe weather events experienced in the U.S. through October of last year. We turn our attention to the financial impact of weather events since 1980. I want to highlight the approximate cost of the weather impacts in the last 2 years, which would be $500 and $600 billion. We plan for winter events in addition to summer extreme events. In 2022, the Southeast experienced Winter Storm Elliott, where approximately 90,500 megawatts of generation were lost and 5,000 megawatts of load were shed. SERC did have one significant winter storm in January of last year, known as being called Winter Storm Heather. Although conditions were very similar and demanding to Elliott, due to those lessons learned from Elliott and other winter storms, generators performed well and grid operators took action to maintain service to customers while maintaining reliability.
Excuse me. On that previous slide, there was a reference to RC communication. What is that?
Oh, so the RC is the reliability coordinator. They're essentially the top of the food chain, let's say, when it comes to dispatching and maintaining the system on a minute-by-minute basis.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mitigation strategies to address the extreme weather risk include a thorough investigation of events such as Winter Storm Elliott, followed by a report with recommendations. SERC and NERC provide various resources and webinars and establish requirements for generator owners and operators to meet increased unit reliability. SERC also performs an annual post-winter survey that focuses on the following: winterization planning and implementation, fuel supply and testing, communication, training, winter experiences and practices.
May I ask a question on that slide? When you say recommendations, those are recommendations from SERC and or NERC?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is there any penalty if a utility doesn't adhere or adopt any of the recommendations?
Not to recommendations, but this is my personal saying, recommendations that aren't followed become standards.
Okay, thank you.
Just to further answer, we do, so if there is a non-compliance to an actual federal regulation so they are non-compliant, we have authority up to 1.2 million per day per violation to sanction.
Let's shift to SERC's number 6 risk, which is the new one, rapid non-traditional load growth. This risk was proposed and added to the risk registry in 2024. Drivers for this load growth include data centers, crypto mining facilities, artificial intelligence, and an increase in manufacturing such as solar panels and EV vehicles, which stress the transmission and distribution system across SERC's footprint. Some areas are experiencing forecasted annual load increases of over 8%. Planning and system enhancements are necessary to prevent transmission issues and potential resource inadequacies. Load growth may range from 1 to 3%. However, the addition of a data center or crypto mining facility will be a big step change. These changes occur quickly, while resources take much longer. That challenge will be covered in a little bit. Over the past year, grid planners have nearly doubled the 5-year load growth forecast. The nationwide estimates of electricity demand shot up from 2.6% to 4.7% growth over the next 5 years, as reflected in this 2023 FERC filing. This is likely an underestimate. Several recent updates add additional gigawatts to that forecast. One such update by one of SERC's entities shows a new estimated peak load growth by 2030, 8 times the growth projected just 2 years ago. These are 2 examples of how quickly the load projections have changed. The growth of remote work, video streaming, online shopping, and artificial intelligence has led to a frenzy expansion of data centers nationwide. By 2030, electricity demand at the U.S. data centers could triple, using as much power as 40 million homes, according to Boston Consulting Group. In Northern Virginia, one of the nation's largest data center hubs, at least 75 facilities have opened since 2019. The local utility there, Dominion Energy Virginia, says data center capacity could double in just 5 years. Data center growth is forecast to exceed $150 billion through 2028. So this is what I had mentioned earlier. Connecting the new load to the grid may take only a year or 2. In comparison, it may take over 4 years to bring new generation online at best, and even longer to build new transmission connections between regions to enable power sharing during peak periods. Just 251 miles of high voltage transmission lines were completed last year, and this has been declining for decades. So what are some of the mitigation strategies we're looking into? Infrastructure upgrades, leverage federal incentives, adopt new technologies, and address supply chain and labor issues. Next, we'll move into variable energy resources. They are also known as inverter-based resources. As the name implies, the resource depends on the weather as its fuel source, so forecasting the resource output is difficult. Since these resources are somewhat new, the industry knowledge is limited to how the resources respond to system events. With many risks, diversity is a mitigation strategy. Although SERC's resource mix leans towards natural gas at 47%, you can see here South Carolina has less dependency on natural gas and a more diverse fuel source mix at this time.
Those graphs on that slide, is that as of 2024, or what is the time frame that that mix is?
This would have been probably mid-2024.
Okay, thank you.
The data would have come from mid-2024. We published this towards the end of the year. Yeah. To provide a summary of resource additions since the early 1950s, you see the coal generating plants were the resource of choice into the 70s and 80s, with nuclear and natural gas sprinkled in the mix. However, natural gas resources exploded in the early 2000s, with wind expanding since the mid-2000s and solar expanding its footprint starting in the year 2020. This slide indicates the resources being retired compared to what is being added. When coal resource facilities are retired, they are replaced with gas, solar, and some wind across the U.S. The previous 2 slides show the transition from fossil plants, meaning coal, to variable energy resources. In addition to having sufficient resources to meet customer demands, power systems require other services to maintain reliability. These services are referred to as essential reliability services. They are necessary to maintain a reliable power system, including inertia for frequency response, reactive support for maintaining acceptable voltages, and then what's called fault current is needed to ensure the protection systems that protect the grid operate as desired. And then resource dispatch to manage changing customer energy demands. Since the inception of electrical power, these services have been provided by traditional generation. The industry is trying to determine how these services can be maintained in the future. Inverter-based resources, or IBRs, continue to increase in the resource mix, with solar and solar battery resources dominating the SERC footprint. These resources are connected both to the transmission and distribution system. The planning coordinators and transmission planners studying the system do not have all of these resources included in their models, especially those on the distribution system. Resources below 75 megawatts have been excluded from NERC registration on the transmission system until recently. A little while ago, issued Order 901, which requires 20 megawatts and greater IBRs connected to 60 kilovolt and above be registered with NERC. Ultimately, these IBR models will be integrated in the planning studies. NERC Load Model Working Group is working to develop models for these DRs, which is ongoing.
All right, I'm sorry. The models you're talking about, and you said 20 megawatts or?
Yep.
20 megawatts and above, or 20 megawatts?
And above.
Okay. All right. What models are you talking about? An interface? I wasn't sure.
So these are the models our planners across the industry use to study the system to make sure when something is put in service, it's stable, it won't cause problems, it won't cause things to go out unnecessarily.
Okay. And that is that what SERC is doing, or is that what's required from NERC now to the utilities? Or
There are plenty of requirements around planning the system. SERC works with the utilities to work, because the utility only sees their footprint, right? So we have to see the whole region as they interact with each other.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. The number of solar plants continue to increase in the SERC footprint. The challenge is to offset the loss of solar output at night and when solar radiation is minimal. A significant challenge is during cold winter periods when morning and evening peaks occur and solar output is zero or very minimal. Entities must have other resources such as natural gas to meet the load demands during these periods.
Mr. Krieger? Chair Powers? Okay, thank you. Do you have any idea why the numbers associated with battery resource are so different from 2022 to 2024?
Don't quote me on it, but I believe there was a lot more federal incentives back then.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that, but I don't have a specific answer on why it's so different.
I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been the other way around. You know, from a resource perspective, or you know, the chain of delivery of materials back in 2022 could have been compromised, but
it could be. Probably
we don't know.
It's probably a number of
Okay.
factors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This chart on slide 28, this is how much is added each year. This isn't a cumulative. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this chart shows SERC versus the other regions across the country. As you can see, SERC has the highest number of these types of facilities. Now switching to the amount of IBRs that are in the interconnection queue within the SERC footprint. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs data showed over 33,000 megawatts of solar battery facilities in the process to be connected to the power system, and over 138,000 megawatts of IBR pending connection to the power system. Under the previously mentioned Order 901, FERC is addressing RBR data sharing, data and model validation, planning and operational studies, and performance. NERC and SERC, along with the other regions, are executing the approved work plans, including registering non-BES facilities. The ERO is working with the industry to educate them on the requirements and assist with the process. Why is this important? Transmission planners need to accurately reflect the existing system to effectively study the system, identify reliability concerns, and develop projects to address the concerns. The ERO work plan includes various outreach efforts, including webinars, quick reference guides, guidelines, white papers, and technical reports. SERC continues identifying, monitoring, and mitigating reliability risk impacting our footprint. The annual risk review process allows all stakeholders to submit risks for evaluation. Emerging risks include large loads, such as data centers and grid electrification. SERC works closely with NERC, FERC, and the other regions and stakeholders to maintain grid reliability. That's it.
And thank you all so much for your time. If you have any questions on the material provided, we'd be happy to answer them.
If I might, Jim.
Commissioner Cass.
And you don't have to go back to the slides, but like on 3 and 5, where you talk about the ERO, and I was trying to write and listen, and I'm awful at that. Did you say that the ERO is does not come under the government, is not a government program, but it is private organization, or could you explain that again?
Correct. So there was FERC who is the federal government. They have given the authority to NERC, who is an independent corporation. It's a North American Reliability Corporation. So, and there they also have the 6 regional entities, which is SERC, and we are essentially the boots on the ground. So NERC oversees all 6 of us, and FERC has, they have the final say to approve or deny different things. Like if we sanction a utility company, SERC would create the whatever the agreement is, whatever they should be penalized, and it goes to NERC, and then it goes to FERC for final approval. So there is a connection there. However, we are not considered the federal government. We are independent, and so is NERC. We are which is the authority was delegated specifically under Section 215 of the Federal Power Act. So that is where FERC gave the authority to NERC, and then we are the boots on the ground corporation. So is that
Okay,
explain?
I think I have, well, I've got the hierarchy of, FERC, NERC, CERC,
Yes.
and that helped, but I'm still trying to fully grasp ERO now, the function now. I read, what it says, you're missing solely reliability and security of the bulk electric system.
Yes.
Does, as far as it relates to NERC, I mean, do you guys just do like the studies and this stuff and you pass it down to NERC, say, hey, y'all need to do this, or do you have any authority to do any of that?
I'll let Dave,
Okay.
Mr. Krieger, answer.
Yeah, so CERC has several things we do. One is the enforcement, auditing, fining, things of that nature. As part of the Federal Power Act, they set it up such that it's not just a punitive body. It's actually trying to work and help the actual utilities who own all the equipment and operate the equipment, such that that we provide opportunities for learning and growing outside of just the just the stick method. We're also a carrot too. Is that
Yes, that
okay?
that
May-
helps. And
Maybe the funding, so we don't get federal funding either. So our funding comes from the people. It comes from their bill. It is included in there. So that's the way that a huge separation. We do not have any government funding. So that's one way to also look at it, that we are our own independent. We answer to the people. We want what's best for the reliability and security of the electric grid.
So on every utility bill, like to every customer, there's an ERO component on that.
Yes.
So next rate case, they can blame some of that on you, you guys.
It's always possible.
Finally, on your page 32 on the outreach and education, looking, I assume, webinar. I assume, all of you do some type studies. And are these things based off of like the winter storms, the things that happen with variable sources and like Texas and that stuff? Is that what this stuff is? Is that a lot of what you do? What happened, what occurred, and just try to get that information out?
The answer is yes to all of it. I mean, there are set planning requirements that you will do planning study, ABC, using criteria, whatever. But then we're also trying to look at events and learn from things that happen, and then also things that are coming up with, like RBRs, for example.
All right. Thank you very much.
Specifically, the long-term reliability assessment that we just published, it's about a 10-year. So we project based off of all of our findings what the next in that assessment the next 10 years could potentially look like, and the risks that come with that. So there is a forward looking as well, not just backwards looking that we do.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston.
Mr. Chair,
Vice Chair Williams.
thank you folks for being here today. Just a few questions for you. Would you say it's fair to describe load growth and demand a risk to reliability?
Is it fair to? Yes, that's why we've put it on our top 10. For many years, over the last, say, 20, 25 years, there hasn't been a lot of load growth for many reasons, everything from the economy to efficiency gains, things of that nature. But with the electrification of pretty much everything, right? And then also these large loads, those load projections that were in the 2 to 3% range for many years are now much higher. And it's just not something the industry was used to, let's say. We gotta learn, just like in any other thing when things are changing.
How do you qualify those risks? And what I'm getting to, I heard you describe data centers in your presentation. I heard you reference crypto mining facilities and also large manufacturers. Do you tier those facilities? As an example, would a data center or crypto mining facility be a tier 1 risk, the most risk to reliability as compared to a manufacturing facility, or do you consider demand regardless of where it comes from?
Well, it's kind of early. The Large Load Task Force that NERC kicked off only started, I want to say, March of last year. So they're looking into a lot of that stuff. I suspect a lot of that will happen because whether crypto mining acts differently than a data center, which acts differently than a manufacturing facility, they all have their own idiosyncrasies that produce different challenges. As an industry, we're looking at it, and we're just not quite there yet.
Okay, and so if I understand your answer correctly, there very well may be serious differences, or I should say differences that are worth considering when deciding to serve those, or not even deciding to serve, but when considering where those facilities are located. You're suggesting maybe that there should be some additional considerations that may not be happening now when assessing how those facilities impact the grid, whether it's crypto mining, data centers, or a large manufacturer.
Yeah, so as an example, a data center is just going to stay on with their servers humming 24/7. Whereas a crypto mining facility is actually going to be price responsive. It's not going to do its data mining when the price of electricity, like in the middle of a hot summer day. It'll do it overnight. So it, moves up and down. So that creates challenges in itself. And just the speed and frequency of these things coming into existence just wasn't seen 5 years ago. I mean, it just wasn't a thing, right? I mean, the amount of data or the amount of energy that artificial intelligence uses is immense. And it's just not something I don't think the world saw 5, 6, 7 years ago. So we're learning. We're trying to be as quick on our feet as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Could I follow up on that?
Commissioner Caston.
In response to the question that Commissioner Jay Williams asked, you were talking about, say, a data center or some large user that pretty much has a steady or uniform demand over, say, a 24-hour period versus, you mentioned crypto, but it could be some other industry that kicks off at 8 a.m., ramps up,
Sure.
8 hours, 12 hours. Yeah. With the emphasis on that, I'm assuming that's significant because of the type generation you'd need, or the way you manage it, what's the significance from the electric utilities perspective relative to ramping versus uniform?
So, you have to balance power at the minute it's consumed. It can't be stored. I mean, you can store it in batteries, but you can't. It has to be served instantaneously. Maybe I'll do it based on the sheer scale of these things. We say in the industry 1 megawatt is about 700 to 1,000 homes. So what, a couple neighborhoods maybe? Some of these facilities that are coming online are 150 to 200 megawatts in one location, and they can be built in a year or two from when we know about it. I'm sure Microsoft has been planning it for years, but they don't tell us until they're ready to connect. If you even know the transformer you want to use, sometimes it can take 1.5 years to 2 years to order it, and get it manufactured and then on the site. So it's the sheer size of these things at a single location, not spread out, and then the speed at which they're coming is the real problem for us.
So if I understood that math you just said, you're talking about now the equivalent to 1 to 2 million people coming in 1 year in one place.
Correct.
If you look at the equivalent megawatt usage.
On a city block.
All right, and then if that 1 to 2 million megawatt city is uniform or ramp up, does that also affect that equipment usage, generation, whatever?
It does. I could go into very technical engineering stuff, which I don't think we want to do that. But there's they require certain physics of equipment around it that it's not there right now. We have to install that.
I guess it complicates it more. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Chair Powers. Thank you for being here. You've given us a lot of information quickly, and so I may ask a question that you answered, which is, how are you funded?
We're essentially a line item on every electric bill.
Okay.
Footprint.
Okay. And early on in the presentation, some reference, I believe, was made to remote work being one of the drivers of an issue and maybe related to data centers.
That's correct.
Could you unpack that a little bit more for me? Because it kind of, in my mind, if the work was happening one place and then it's happening another place, is it a transmission issue? Is it a generation
It's
increase?
more those data centers. are needed to transmit data from, instead of, you think of it this way, you have if you're in a building, all your servers are in that building.
Right.
But if you're working from home, all that data now needs to go back and forth, is one driver of it.
Okay.
And that data's got to be, I won't say housed somewhere, but it needs the servers out in
Right.
the world to
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
If you would not mind indulging me, sir, I actually would not be bored by hearing the physics and the engineering piece that you were about to go through with Commissioner Caston, as I don't have an engineering background, and this is an opportunity to hear that.
Sure. So, I think the easiest thing is voltage to understand is us engineers hate this as an example of it. But if you think of water in a pipe, the current or the electricity that powers on the lights and does everything is the flow of the water. And then the water pressure behind it is the voltage. So you need that water pressure to move electrons around. When you stick a significant load at one location, it has a lot of voltage demands to it, which you have to produce. That can be from a generator, that could be from something called a capacitor, it could be any other number of ways, but it needs that voltage support. When you just stick a huge load on a transmission line somewhere, that may be a long way from a generator. So it's not going to get voltage support from there. Or you have to install a capacitor near it, for example. Again, that's a long lead time thing. It's just something that you just can't order it up from Walmart and they'll install it the next day type of thing. These facilities produce what's called harmonics, which if you think of the way the power flows, it goes like this 60 times a second. Well, these things are not going up and down. So it produces what's called harmonics, which you then have to filter out, which is, again, something that if you don't, it will cause a lot of equipment to just trip for normal operation. So we can handle that. They're called filters, but again, it's another piece of equipment that needs to be installed and bought and all that. So I can keep going if you want. Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask this? Is it okay, Commissioner Williams, while he's on that subject?
Yes, sir.
You used a water analogy, and I'm not wanting to say anything because of that,
Yeah.
but it sounds like what I'm understanding, at least from that, relative to the ramping versus the uniform or whatever, is it affects those kind of rapid growths or rapid ramp affects the entire electric utility, the transmission lines, the water lines equivalent. And as a water line, you have it designed to meet a certain flow, to give you a certain pressure. But then you have the hottest day of the year and you've got more demand, then you have a huge warehouse fire. So you've got that on that same line. You're trying to push all this through a line with that unexpected event, which affects not only line size, but size of plants, pump stations and such. So relative to, and keep going as long as you can until he makes us quit. That would be the complexity the utility has to deal with relative to, all right, we might have the equivalent to another 1 million, 2 million customers in the next year or more. Plus, we might have something ramping it up that might be 1.5, 2.0 of that over a short period of time. So we've got to, do we have the transmission lines adequately sized? Do we have the distribution system to pick that up. Then we got these long lead item things, transformers, capacitors, and probably going to need some additional generation. Is that kind of
Yeah,
a summation of it?
that very good. Yeah.
Well, don't stop if you've got more to dig.
Oh, making me go back to college here. Let's see. There's this is not as much as a data center problem, but it's an IBR problem. I did mention fault current. So what we have called on all these equipment are relays, which will tell a circuit breaker to open if, say, there's a lightning strike on a line, to protect the equipment. Because the worst thing you can do is destroy the equipment, because then you can't use it anymore. So when a fault happens, whether it's a lightning strike or a tree falling on a line or just equipment that fails, these relays need what's called fault current, which is very high current that tells them to trip. That fault current is created from what we call spinning machines, which are coal, gas, nuclear, hydro. They produce what I was showing before, those waves of electricity goes up and down. Well, what an inverter does is it just does constant. It's all the way across. It's not going up and down, so it produces no fault current. If you get too much of these in an area, which California is very close to getting to that in the Southeast, we're a few years behind them. Once that fault current gets too low, the protection equipment will not operate, meaning that fault will stay on the line, either destroying the equipment and or endangering workers or the public. So it's not something we want. It's an issue we're working on. There's still a lot of work out there in the industry. It's not solved yet, but it will someday. And then the other big one we've kind of talked about is the load following, where you have produced energy at the same instant it's consumed. You'll see this is really a problem also in California. It's starting to be a little bit in North Carolina. On let's say a day in March that's 65 degrees and sunny, a lot of your generation is going to come from your solar. Well, what happens at 6, 7 o'clock at night is the solar goes away rapidly. You have to make, so the load's going to start going up, because for the same reason the solar's going out, people are turning on their lights, they're turning on their TVs, they're making dinner. So that load is still going up rapidly while your generation is going down very rapidly. So you need to chase that load, which is a challenge when you start retiring a lot of traditional generation, let's say. That is being met with natural gas right now. We are sufficient for years to come, but depending on policies that are made and choices that are made, we don't know. That's why we're out here. That's why we do these state outreaches, is to inform decision makers on the impacts of certain policies. Good.
Thank you very much, sir. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. If I'm remembering right, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you all came a couple of years ago. Is there what's the biggest difference, change since that time that you presented to us?
So last time we were here, it was July 2023.
Okay. So July of 23, I think is what my colleague just informed me of. So over the last year and a half, so that risk report that we talked about, we do that every 2 years, but we do rank the risks every year, and they'll move up and down. Some of the one that has moved up significantly, we didn't talk about today, is supply chain risk. That one I have to go back. I think that's our number one risk. Extreme weather is always that's been up there for years. But then the large load that we talked about today. That was new this year. Yeah, supply chain is first. By 2023, it might have been moving up, but I think it's moved to the top since then.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any further commissioner questions? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Appreciate all this information. So I had two unrelated questions. So one of them is we're making these predictions in artificial intelligence and the data centers, particularly the data centers, and the amount of power that those things require. So one thing that happened this week that made me start thinking is over the weekend or early this week, this Chinese company, DeepSeek, that apparently came up with a much better artificial intelligence chip. I haven't heard anything about that flowing into the data centers and needing less power.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yeah.
There's some things as far as you're referencing other publications or other things. I'm not real sure exactly.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just move away from that. Let me ask a question about one of your slides. So on slide 26, and you don't necessarily have to flip to it, but it's the one that has 4 photographs.
Yes.
And the one in the bottom left corner that talks about the fault current. What's going on there?
So this is what I was talking about with the relay equipment a few minutes ago. For wherever this picture came from, that's a line that shows either somebody got the exact moment, the bolt of lightning or whatever happened there, or it's something where the relay didn't work and it's essentially burning down the line. So that fault current is not produced by solar and wind in its current, the way they currently operate. So that is obviously a problem if this picture occurs. So is that what you're getting at, or am I missing?
I believe that does. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Any further commissioner questions? Hearing none, I'll thank you, Mr. Kruger and Ms. Gomez, for your time and your presentation to us. If there's nothing further, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.